Here we are starting with Rome. When we talk about Rome, there's Rome the Republic and there's Rome the Empire, and right now we're discussing Rome the Republic. So here's some terms that would be good for you to look over and to be familiar with. That way as you're reading and when you take tests and you see these terms, you're going to know what they are. Now, something that you're not really going to get in your textbook, I say not really, that you're not going to get in your textbook, is something that I think would be interesting to bring out. So let's look at a basic timeline here. Around about the 700s BC or BCE, whichever one you prefer, we see the Greeks coming out of the Dark Age, and at the same time we see Rome, the city, is founded. Okay, so when the Greeks are rediscovering or reviving older skills of having a written language, international trade, things of that nature, that's when Rome, the city, is founded. In the next century, the 600s BC, we see early democracy in Athens, and then we have the Jews in Babylon. Okay, so the Jews are undergoing the Babylonian captivity, and we're going to talk about the vision of a future, which we find in the book of Daniel. And then also during this century, Cyrus comes in with Persia, and he lets the Jews go home. He releases them from the Babylonian captivity. Over the next 2 centuries, we see the establishment of the Roman Republic, as well as the classical age in Greece. The following century, 300s BC, this is when Philip and his son Alexander are expanding Greek culture, and Alexander the Great in particular expands the Macedonian Empire to cover much of the known world. But because he dies at such an early age, we see that empire fractured, and we also see the first great expansion of Rome. So there are people in Rome who definitely know Alexander's name, and so we don't need to completely discount what's going on in the world when we talk about Rome. The following century, in the 200s, Rome controls the Italian peninsula. And then in the last century, of the millennium, this is where we see the Maccabean revolt and the Roman Republic ending, and the beginning of the Roman Empire. So let's talk about that vision of the future. We find it in the book of Daniel, the biblical book of Daniel, in chapter 2. Daniel prophesies in Babylon at the same time as Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and Daniel being one of the major prophets. And King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon has a dream, and this dream disturbs him. And so he calls in all of the wise men, and he says, hey, tell me what my dream is, and then interpret it. Are you all going to die? And they say, okay, well, I mean, you need to tell us the dream first. And he says, if you can't tell me what the dream is and then interpret it, you're obviously not what you say you are. So everybody just starts making their last arrangements. Daniel is considered a wise man, and he comes across some of these people, and he says, what's happening? He says, hey, make your last will and testament, and because we all going to die. So Daniel goes and he prays, and then he goes to the king, and he says, this is what your dream was, and this is the interpretation of the dream. And ultimately, he saves all of the wise men, and then accepts a high political position. So, what is the vision? If you see some biblical scripture references, I would encourage you to read those, just as you can have some better background and much more detail than what I can offer here. So, this vision of the future, we have King Nebuchadnezzar, who has a vision of a statue, and different portions of the statue are made of different metals, and there is a hand coming from the mountain which knocks the head off, and then there's different things that happen, and eventually you get down to where there's very little left. So in the statue of a tall, strapping man here, we have a head of gold, the chest and the arms made of silver, the belly and the thighs made of bronze, legs of iron, and then the feet are made of a mixture of iron and clay. Those two don't exactly go well together, but there they are. Daniel interprets the dream for him, and he says, hey, so the head of gold, that's you, Nebuchadnezzar, and the hand coming from the mountain, that is the hand of God, and he's going to take you out of your position. And ultimately, all of the rulers that will come after you, it is God who places them and God who removes their authority as well. Historians and theologians agree that that this particular vision and the different portions of the statue represent the different major empires during the ancient world. So the head of gold representing Babylon, the chest and the arms of silver represent Persia, the belly and the thighs represent Greece, and this is extended to Alexander the Great. The legs of iron represent Rome, and then the feet made of iron and clay. This is the divided Rome. So we all know that Rome falls, but Rome does not completely dissolve or disintegrate. It remains, but it remains fractured. So there we go. Now let's talk about, once again, the geography, because again, geography, agriculture, that plays a big role in how societies are established, different parts of their culture, characteristics, things of that nature. So it's important to go over. So geographically speaking, the Italian peninsula, kind of a lot better than the Greek peninsula. There's a lot of great access to the Mediterranean Sea with calm harbors. They're not huge crashing waves up against sharp rocks or anything like that. There's calm harbors. There are fertile plains, making agriculture a lot easier. People can grow all different kinds of produce. So they're not having to import nearly as much as what the Greeks were having to do. You find hills and not mountains, which allows for better communication and for unification later on, politically speaking. The exact date for the founding of Rome is unknown, but archaeological evidence suggests that 753 BC is a pretty good guess. So CA, once again, stands for circa, around about. So around about 753 BC is when the city of Rome was founded. Again, this would be about the same time as the Greeks began establishing their colonies after the Dark Age. The Roman legend of Rome's founding was important to all Romans for centuries, and the story goes something like this. A Trojan hero escapes vanquish. He escapes execution, and one of his female descendants seeks to live only for the gods. So she has an affair with the god Mars and then gives birth to twin boys. And she names these boys Romulus and Remus. Her uncle, who was her guardian, did not believe her story, and so he took her babies and threw them into a river. But soon thereafter, a shepherd found the boys being nursed by a she-wolf. And so the farmer, the shepherd, takes the boys and rears them as his own, and when they grow up, Romulus winds up killing his brother Remus, making Romulus the king of Rome. Okay, so this is where we would get the name of the city of Rome, is from Romulus. The statue at the bottom right commemorates the story. The wolf, this is kind of interesting, the wolf was sculpted in the 5th century by the Etruscans, sort of the first Romans. It's called the Etruscan she-wolf. I can't really say that very well. But the boys were added during the Renaissance. So I find that kind of interesting. Now, there are some other legends, and legends were pretty important to the Romans. There's another legend, the legend of the Sabines. Now, the legend basically says that Romulus is leading his men, and they realize, hey, if we don't get some women up in here, it doesn't matter how good fighters we are, our society is going to die out. And so they try to make an agreement with a local group of people, the Sabines. But the Sabines say, we're not giving you anybody. We're not giving you anything. So Romulus says, you know what? No hard feelings. Let's have a party. So they have a party. And when all of the Sabine men are drunk, the Romans fight, and they are able to get the women. So they take the women, and the women are held for over a year. There are children that are born, and all this stuff. Well, the Sabine men have finally sort of regrouped, they've recovered, and they're going back to get their women. And when they do, this epic battle ensues, and you have the women, you can see from the artwork at the top right, you have the women who are standing in between the family members they grew up with, the Sabines, and their now husbands, who are also the fathers of their children. They've been with them for so long that they can't bear to see them fighting. So the women go and they run in between the two opposing sides, and they say, "Stop! If you're going to kill anybody, kill us, because we're what the fight is over. But we cannot stand to see our husbands and our fathers and our brothers killing each other." And so the battle stops. Now, these legends are incredibly important because they show a couple of very important characteristics of the Romans. With Romulus killing Remus and having the city of Rome named for him, this legend really promotes the Roman characteristics of violence and death. Violence being a very big part of Roman culture, and death also being a part of it. They sort of glory and revel in death. As opposed to the Greeks who revel sort of in that manliness and competition, the Romans are sort of glorying and reveling in death and in gore. The Sabine legend shows how Rome expanded by absorbing outsiders. The Romans are not like the Greeks in the sense of we are superior to everyone. They sort of take on Alexander's example, or Philip's example, excuse me, and they make the conquered peoples allies as opposed to slaves. Herodotus claimed the Etruscans, who are considered the first Romans, he claimed that they came from Lydia in Asia Minor. And recently, DNA evidence actually confirmed this. And the Etruscans definitely enjoyed the good life. Most of their writings, haven't really been deciphered. So most of what we know about them comes from archaeological evidence, specifically their artwork, architecture, things of that nature. The Etruscans actually ruled Rome for a little while, and the Roman Empire gleaned much from Etruscan culture. The Etruscans were definitely influenced by the Greeks, and they used that to create engineering designs which fit their terrain better than what would have fit the Greeks. So they learned to drain marshes, to build sewers, to build with arch and vault construction as opposed to post and lintel. And the Romans, looking at the Etruscans, also decided that the Etruscan toga was a good look. And they also took the Etruscan written language, transforming it to fit their language of Latin. It seems that the Etruscans held the Roman monarchy until about 509 BCE, and eventually the Romans would rebel against this. The main Roman values I want you to be familiar with are these three right here. Much like the Greek heroic value of arete, representing manliness and courage and excellence and individual competition and all that jazz, the Roman values are, they exist to maintain order, to provide stability, and also to bring them divine favor from the gods. So first we have mos maiorum, the way of the elders. If something is old, it's tested by time, right? So if it's been around for a while, it must be good. If it's new, however, it can be dangerous. So you must treat all things new with very much a heavy level of suspicion, because you don't want to just jump on any change. You want to hold on to the way of the elders. Virtus, or manly virtue, very similar to arete. This is strength, loyalty, courage, wisdom, and moral purity. This is kind of big. Moral purity. How you act in public and in your family was of enormous import. And part of this moral purity and part of this manly virtue was placing the country's interest above your own, or above the interest of your family. So you would look to Rome first, and then you would look to those around you and yourself. So that is important. You probably should put like a star next to that or something, because these values, again, they're very, very important. And placing the country's interests first, another one of those values that is sort of like key here. And then we have fides, or faithfulness. And this is the idea of keeping obligations no matter what has come your way. If you have made an agreement, that is it's a commitment, and you're not going to break it. And respect was the highest form of faithfulness. So if you are a person who has less money and you don't show respect to someone who has more money or a higher social position, then you're not really keeping the way of the elders, are you? And you're not keeping faithfulness either. And neither are you keeping virtus. You're not keeping any of these. One, because it is the way of the elders to show respect to people of a higher social standing. It is faithfulness to what has been established by showing respect. And then 3, you're not placing your country's interests first. You're not maintaining order and providing stability, and you're not bringing divine favor. You're putting yourself first because you want to feel different or better, or have a different position in life. So all of these are very much intertwined and very important. Part of this idea comes from the patron-client system, right? And I refer to this as social networking at its creepiest, okay? So we have a patron who would be a powerful and a wealthy man, who could be a noble or common, right? He could be a patrician or plebeian. But he's of a superior status, right? He's of a superior status. And he is one who holds moral authority. Moral authority. This is a person who is setting the example for others to follow. A client is one who's going to benefit from a patron. Oh, man. This made the screen go white again. Anyway, it's one who benefits from a patron. He shows unbending loyalty, or fides, right? Unbending loyalty. He's keeping his commitment no matter what. Now, there are mutual obligations which endure for generations. The patron can provide anything from monetary help to helping to provide food, to helping to get a certain position. So, and in return, clients would assist maybe in the forum, going to the forum with their patron, and when he wants to present a particular law, maybe he wants to make the leash law harsher. He's tired of seeing so many stray dogs, right? Then all of the clients would shout down the opponents, and they would cheer their patron. So very much a mutual obligatory relationship here. Social stability, last point down at the bottom, and well-being were very much achieved by faithfully maintaining these established relationships. Because at any point, if those break down, then the entire society could break down, and this was not good. So again, it seems that the Etruscans held the Roman monarchy until around about 509 BCE. Many Romans rebelled against the monarchy because of a rumor that one of the princes raped a virtuous Roman woman, Lucretia, and she killed herself rather than be subject to public ridicule. And so for her honor, the Romans rebel against the Etruscan monarchy, and a senate is established. To the Romans, having a republic, by establishing the Senate, they've established a republic. They no longer have a monarchy. This republic meant the power rested with the people, who were represented by smaller groups of people. Getting ahead of myself here. Okay, let's go back. So they've established the republic after they overthrow the monarchy. There is a Senate which was already established as a council to the king. But when the monarchy is overthrown, the Senate remains. Okay, so the Senate remains. At this point in time, we have what's known as the struggle of the orders, patricians versus plebeians. Ultimately, you have the poor wanting protection from the abuses heaped upon them by the rich. And they want a larger presence in government. They want to be able to have a bigger voice. So ultimately, the plebeians do win the right to make laws in their own assembly. And we see from the struggle of the orders the earliest Roman written law code, and that is the 12 Tables. And the 12 Tables, one of the documents that you're going to read, includes some information from the 12 Tables. Ultimately, the 12 Tables grants greater equality between rich and poor, as well as the opportunity for some social mobility, the opportunity to advance in your social ranking. The people basically believed that fair laws would protect against civil unrest. So laws that had kind of already been established, they really just want to put them in stone, literally. That way, no one can take advantage of what was just passed orally. This is a picture of the Forum when I went several years ago, I guess about a decade ago. Oh, it hurts to admit that. Decade. Anyway, so the Forum is the place where you would go to conduct your political business. Now, when the Republic is born, they have to figure out a way to govern it, right? And basically, governing this new republic consists of three branches: consuls, senate, and assemblies. The sort of executive branch, if you will, was the consul branch. There were two men called consuls. Every year, two men were elected to serve as consuls, and one consul could veto the other. And this was a means by which to protect against a monarchy, right? The next branch of government was the Senate. And if you remember, the Senate was already established to be a council to the king, but it is remaining here to act once again as a council to the consuls. Right? They gain more prominence in governing, and it's from the Senate. It really is where you're going to get the consuls coming from. Lastly, there are the assemblies. Adult male citizens made up the assemblies, which voted on matters by group, not as individuals. Over time, and it does take time because you do have the patricians and the plebeians, the wealthy and the working class, the aristocratic, and then the non-nobility. That are struggling for who's going to have the most say, who will have the most political sway. And finally, in 367 BCE, we see a law passed requiring one of the consuls to be from the plebeian class. So there is an effort by the Roman government to ensure that that both rich and poor are represented in the government, even from the highest platform. So we're going to end there for right now, and we'll pick up with the Republic expansion.